Welcome to session 7. In the last session, we had a look at two additional needs as part of our needs analysis document, specifically the need to connect with other systems to share data, and also the need for reports, different complexities of reports. In this session, we're going to look at what happens after our needs analysis is complete. What happens after we purchase a system, have it installed? Well, we need to properly implement it so that we can take the most advantage of it and everything goes smoothly. Now, we're also then going to move on to this new exciting topic called HR research, which is less about research and more about an attitude in HR, about the professional practice of HR, how we look at our workforce, how we try to condition or make changes to our workforce to be more strategic, more fine-tuned, and more optimized. So we have a few sessions on that. Quite interesting stuff. We're going to discuss a lot of things about who our workforce is, what they do, how we could look at them from different views, and then also how to identify and benchmark various issues or behaviors that we find and how to affect the change. So let's take a view where we're at up to this point. You started off with a vision and some excitement about getting HRIS into your HR department. You are the champion in your department to do this. You've managed to convince your boss and other users that HRIS is a great idea to take your department and your organization forward into the future. Think more strategically, have more time available, do more value added HR work. So you did an ROI, you convinced everybody it's a great idea. You then proceeded to complete a thorough needs analysis document, and we looked at several sections related to that so that you know exactly what you need, right down to great detail. So when you go to market and you look at different vendors that are going to sell you this HRIS software, and or maybe custom build one, then they can work off of a needs analysis so none of the needs are met. So you did go out and you purchased an HRIS. Finance people helped you, purchasing people help you with that. Quite often consultants help you with that. Now, I won't get into that in detail, but if you are interested in that part of an HRIS project, if you're involved with it, please refer to my HRIS toolkit and you'll get some pointers there as well. Now, the next thing is to think about what do we do? So let's say you have the HRIS, it's been purchased, IT has installed it. You now need to implement it. And implementation, we'll just quickly go over here because most of you will not be involved in an implementation in real life. But if you're in a smaller mid-sized organization that doesn't have an IT department, then you might be involved. And it's always a good idea to learn how implementation works. So the full notes are in the HRS toolkit if you ever need to refer to them in the future. Now, the process, the way I've designed it, is an 8-step process. And I've gotten this from different size companies, small, medium, large companies that I've implemented, over 100 of these. And I thought, what's the best approach to tell people of how to proceed? Okay, now remember, if you're in a larger organization that maybe has ERP or robust IT department, you wouldn't be controlling a lot of this anyways. You'd be a part of it, but it's good to understand. So first thing in implementation, and remember, you can't just buy software, install it, and tell people to start using it. That's like buying a house and then telling your family one day, hey, move in and start using it. No, there's a process to it, right? And we're going to start by identifying socio-technical issues. And that means people interacting with technology when it creates stress or anxiety, especially with people who are really good at their jobs in HR. They're really good at what they do, but they came from an old school. Maybe they started years ago and they can't embrace the technology the way maybe you would. Or it might be younger people as well. That's not the point. The point is you understand who is at what level. How will they embrace this change? Because HRIS will change the way they do HR. Everything will be digital, electronic now, and it's a good thing. So you would use techniques to help people cope with socio-technical stress, help them deal with it. Things like additional time, customized training, even games, maybe a buddy system. Now, once that's taken care of, or as it's being taken care of, you would then provide initial training to early users. And these are people who would be part of the implementation team overseeing the setup, the input, that sort of thing. And quite often the vendor where you purchase the system will train you. and you can become the trainer, or quite often you can just purchase additional training from the vendor. It's quite expensive though. Early on, you would have to establish tables of codes, and that would probably be you who would do it, which would be the HRIS coordinator. It's not a difficult process. So picture you get a system, and the system doesn't really have anything in it. It's empty. You are going to add employees to your system, and you're going to put those employees in departments. You're going to put them in jobs. You're going to have names of training programs, different codes for health and safety. So when you go into the system and type in a list or a table of departments, that's a table of codes, so that somebody could choose from a drop-down list, right? Security levels, security accounts, login accounts, things like that. Now, as you're doing that, you might as well start collecting and sourcing data. And that means actually getting fresh data from employees, updated resumes, etc., looking at data that you already have, whether it's on paper or electronic, making sure you know where it is, what form it's in, so that you can easily start inputting it or electronically importing it in. And that's a process that your IT or your vendor will help you with. So once you collect and source data and it's clean, you start inputting. And it's important to start inputting quite quickly. So you might want to do sections at a time. Do all your salary data first, then benefits, then training, etc. So at least the system is up and running at each step. And once you input, you can't just say it's all good because I input it. You have to audit it. You really have to check the data that you put in. Not necessarily all of it. I mean, listen, for 1,000 employees, you might put in 1,000,000 pieces of data, right? That's a lot. But you have to check essential things like spelling of names, social insurance numbers, salary, departments, that sort of thing, hire date, critical pieces of data. Once it's checked, you train everybody else, the end users, the other people in HR. Make sure everything's comfortable, hand-holding if you have to, ample time, don't rush this. And then, of course, the last step always would be to evaluate steps 1 to 7. See if anything needs to be revisited, checked, balanced, done over again, done differently. And in fact, this whole process might take you, listen, I've done an implementation where it took 3 months. I've done one that took 4 weeks. So typically it could not be less than 1 month. 1 month is about right for even the smallest place. And that was a company of about 30 employees, a retail company. I did a large brewery that took 1.5 years. Government agency recently took 6 years to get there. Our college itself took 4 years. So it all depends on how large you are, the complexity of your needs, the bureaucracy, etc. But give it ample time. Now the question is, if we have an HRIS in place, and if you did everything right, you'll find that a few months later, a few short months later, people find it intuitive. Paper is less now. We're not thinking paper anymore. We are now logging into a system every morning. All our employee data is in one place. Everyone has access to it simultaneously. All sorts of restrictions are put in terms of who can access what, who can add, change, delete. And you find that your mind is thinking in terms of the system. You're making decisions. You're hiring people right on the system. You're adding training records. You're compensating people. You're doing benefits and health and safety. Everything happens on the system. The talk around your meetings is around the system. The reports come out of your system. And then you sit back one day 6 months later and you have a cup of coffee and you feel great. You championed this. You made it happen. Your organization will never be the same again because you now have a lot of free time. The HRIS is doing so much boring administrative work for you. You don't have to do it. So that's freed up time. And that's going to allow you to do a lot of extra things. Now, there's 2 types of organizations I've seen, okay? So I've implemented a lot of these, and roughly half of the clients, what they do, and this is not right, but what they do is they say, okay, my life is easier. HRIS has made my life easier. We get that. But they keep doing the same thing. Nothing has changed. It's just their life is easier, but they keep doing HR the same way. Not strategic, but more administrative, reactionary. But the other half, what they do is they say, okay, HRIS is giving me more time, but it's also giving me the ability to look at data in ways I've never done before. I can see trends and patterns. I could seek opportunities and problems before they become big. I can see things in data now because of HRIS. And then that other 50% is able to think strategically, value added, proactive, not reactive. They have more meetings, they're more relaxed, they go to conferences, but they're truly harnessing the power found inside the HRIS, the power of data, right? And they're thinking strategically, like I said. They're doing value added work. Now, everything I just described in the last minute is an attitude. It's a way of thinking about what HR is professionally, not administratively, professionally. And I call that topic HR research. Now, you're going to like it. We're going to do 3 sessions on HR research. And don't get bogged down by the word research, okay? It's not like research the way you know from an academic point of view, where you go and you dig through books and reports and you do statistics and write things. No. A part of it, of course, data collection. But research is more of an attitude within HR. It's a professional way of thinking. In fact, I think this is the reason you got into HR. None of you are going to tell me you got into HR because you love filling out reports all day. Paperwork, administration. Sure, you have to do that in the first 1 or 2 years of your job anyways. Everybody does. But I think if I ask you, why did you get into HR? You tell me things like, because you want to know your workforce. You want to protect them. You want to make their jobs better. You want to help them, help you make the organization go forward in a healthy sort of way. Knowing things, being curious, being aware, making changes. Right? That's HR research. Now, over 3 sessions, I'm going to give you what you call framework. I can't make you into HR professionals this semester. That's not the way it works. But if I gave you framework within which to think, and for many of you, it will be common sense, don't worry. You'll pick up on ideas quickly. But by having framework, you can now start the practice, the professional practice of HR. So over the next few years, you will evolve and develop your portfolio of decision making, of how you do things, all within this framework. But you have to start thinking it right now. And in fact, I get this. People say, well, why are you giving us this 3 weeks of framework? Where does it come from? Listen, I've talked to a lot of people, high level, directors, VPs, clients, and I pick their brains over coffee and I ask them, what makes you think the way you do? Why are you so successful? Why can you make decisions that are accurate quickly before anybody else? In fact, why are you getting paid all the big dollars? And they tell me all these words and these ideas. It's mostly about their attitude, how they think. But it all boils down to their access to intelligence, business intelligence, data, information about people. Having it quickly, accurately. Now, of course, remember, HRIS is just one thing. It's just software, but you're also surrounding yourself with Excel and pivots and lots of good, intelligent people as well. Now, let me get to HR research. What does HR research mean to me? Let me break it down to 4 words and it'll make sense, okay? And I'm going to break these words down. It's not a sentence. But to me, HR research is the continual measurement and conditioning of workforce behavior. Now, let's talk about each word, okay? What does measurement mean? I mean, you all know what measurement is. You measure things. We've done a lot of measurements already in Excel. Think about it. Every number is a measurement. And the official word for measurement is metrics. Metrics. So a metric is a result of metrics. Metrics is what you do. The metric is the result. Look, it could be as simple as counting the number of people you have. That's a metric. Right? How do you count them? I don't know. Physically, electronically, who knows? Metric could be something like a behavior that you measure, absenteeism, presenteeism, turnover, rule violations, productivity, quality, teamwork ability. Hey, pretty much all this stuff you have on your resume anyways is a metric of sort. Do you have it? Don't you have it? What's the quality of it? So metrics itself is anything at all you can measure. And measurement is where it starts. Now, I want you to use the word metrics in your LinkedIn and your resume. It just sounds really good, metrics. Now, there are a whole lot of standard metrics in HR, like absenteeism rate. On my Seneca, I have given you a list. In my course, we did a few. In Pivots, we'll do a few more. In your other courses, there's tons of metrics. We'll talk about that in a future slide. But I want to cover off this data collection. I mean, if you're going to measure something, count something, or get qualitative data about something, you need to use data collection. And I know you've heard this 50 times before, but let's just quickly go over it, okay? A questionnaire is not a data collection method, in my opinion. A questionnaire is simply a set of questions you want answered. That's it. You're curious. You're out to find something out. You set out to do that. So you formulate questions in your mind or on paper. What do you want answered? It's how you get them answered. That's the data collection method. I can use surveys, right? It could be electronic surveys. It could be paper surveys. And surveys are quick. You can give them out to thousands of people quickly. They're cheap, very low cost, but they're the least accurate because, you're not in front of the person. People can fraudulate. They can be biased for themselves. Now, interviews, one-on-one, one-to-many interviews, many-to-one interviews. When you interview people, you can look at nonverbal language, body language. You can reword questions. You can interrogate, so to speak. But interviews are the most expensive because it's your time, it's their time. So why not survey everybody and then interview a few just to validate the effectiveness of the survey? And then there's observation. Now, observation is not just seeing. It's also feeling, touching, it's hearing. Sometimes it's temperature, right? You feel the temperature, the smells. Smelling is also observation. So observation is a tool we use all the time, your sense of curiosity. I mean, you don't walk down the street, do you, and not know things around you? Well, I know people. I have friends who just keep bumping into stuff because they're not curious. How many of you are driving down the highway and notice every sign? Read it. I know people who do that and they say, well, I didn't see no sign. How do you know? It didn't say $3 million, turn over here, right? So observation is a very key way to collect data. And then, of course, there's secondary data, or what we call archival data. And that's when you get your questions answered by looking at reports and data that already exists. Now, I'm going to go back to observation. I'll give you a couple of stories. There's some things that you can't survey, interview. Some things you can only get answered by watching or hearing. There was an organization that had a very high incidence of sick days. And they found out upon just asking a few people that a majority of those people were claiming repetitive motion injury, RMI, which could become a WSIB issue as well, workplace safety insurance. Now, repetitive motion injury could happen in your fingers, your wrist, your knees, your elbow, your shoulder. It's when you get injured by doing something over and over. And when you ask your employees, let's just ask them why. Your employees aren't experts. They're not musculoskeletal injury experts. They're not doctors. They're not physiotherapists. They're going to say things like it's genetic, it's hereditary, my grandpa had it. They're going to say things like I play golf, I play tennis. That's not necessarily the truth, right? And people will, of course, always give you their opinion, right or wrong. But when you watch, when you observe how they work, you notice that they're lifting a 30-pound drill, a piece of equipment, 80 times a day, sideways, because it's the most comfortable way. Well, that repetitive motion, day after day, week after week, will result in an injury. You observed. We had a company with head office in downtown Toronto, and they had 8 factories in the north of Toronto, around Vaughan and Brampton. So the HR manager, the senior HR manager at head office, was with the company for 5 years, had never visited any of the factories, believe it or not. One day she gets a report, and on the report stated all the absenteeism rates for all the divisions, the factories. And the one in Vaughan, north of Toronto, their absenteeism rate was really high, like 3 or 4% higher than anyone else. And she wrote a scathing memo back to those managers saying, you don't know, you're not following these practices, you're doing a bad job, your absenteeism is too high, which means productivity is low. So the manager says, can you come up and visit us, please, once? So she did. She got in the car, went to Vaughan for the first time in 5 years, visited them. And within 5-10 minutes of being in the factory, she goes, oh my God, what's that smell? She couldn't stand it. It was like that subtle rotten egg sulfur kind of smell. It wasn't dangerous. It wasn't going to harm anybody. It was just irritating. It was bad. Like, ugh. Now you have to ask yourself, nobody told her that. She didn't know. She smelled it. She observed it by smell that, wow, imagine working here 8 hours a day, 5 days a week after week. Of course you would tend to be more absent. The dirty, smelly workplace. You observe. That's how you find things out. Now remember we talked earlier when I gave you that diagram of HRIS where we had an input and outputs. And I asked you, what are the sources? What's the input? Input to an HRIS, your department, HR department, is data. What are the sources of that data? You have to feed your system with data, else it will starve. And I asked you to think about the sources of that data. Well, if you know the sources of where your data is coming from, then you actively and systematically go out and get it. Don't wait for it to come to you. You go and get it automatically. So I hope you had a chance to think about the sources. You know, your employees are number one source, managers, supervisors, government, media, news. You hear things not about employees, but you hear things about the economy, the inflation rate, your competition. It could be industry associations like HRPA or SHRM that give you data. Now, if we are going to measure something, who are we measuring it about? Well, it's called a workforce. Now, I know you're kind of new to HR. You might not be a business person, but we have to think about the word workforce because a lot of people just think of people as people, my employees. But you really need to start appreciating that your employees are not just a group, a bundle of, let's say, 1,000 people. You need to know how to break them down and stratify them, segment them, slice and dice them. Now, Pivots really does a great job with this. Excel does a great job. Your HRS will do a great job. But think about, how do you break your employees down? Well, sometimes you look at it from a point of view of all 1,000 employees together. But then you can split them by management or non-management lines, factory versus office, union versus non-union, by division, by department, by business unit, even by geography, my Vancouver people versus my Halifax people, my American employees versus Canadian employees. It could be by pure demographics, age, gender, ethnicity. I mean, I'll give you an example. There was a client we had that had a $500,000 a year, that's $500,000, social budget. And for decades, the employees are happy, right? They had all sorts of parties and so on. But the biggest budget was spent around December, which is Christmas time, December, holiday time. And I'll say it because it was Christmas. And everyone was happy, but then they realized, they did a survey, they asked about ethnic affiliation, cultural affiliation. And they found out that 60 some odd percent, let's say 62% of their employees were not celebrating Christmas from a religious point of view. They were because it's a cultural thing in Canada. But they also had other holidays. For example, it might have been Diwali or Holi or Ramadan or Hanukkah. Could be a whole lot of other holidays that they would also benefit from. So HR collected that data voluntarily and managed to shift maybe half of their $500,000 budget towards other celebrations. And you know what? Employees are still happy, but they were happier. New respect for management, they recognized. So why not segment the workforce based on those lines if you had to? You're not discriminating, right? You might want to break your workforce down by reporting relationships. All the employees a certain boss has, right? Or even by the job that they do. So there's plenty of ways to slice and dice and dissect your workforce. Now, that we measure about our workforce, what we measure about our workforce is called a behavior, right? A metric is a behavior. Anything you measure at all is a behavior. Now, don't think of it as a label, like you're behaving or you're not behaving. A behavior is anything that is observed. Of humans, of course. Now, some behaviors are objective, quantitative, measurable. Some behaviors are subjective, qualitative, also measurable. And in my opinion, anything can be measured. You can measure the number of people you have. You can measure the number of females you have, the number of males you have working for you. Those are pretty objective. You can measure the number of days people were absent. That's pretty objective. But then you get into things that are more subjective or qualitative, things like happiness or satisfaction or attitudes or perceptions. What motivates people? Why do people work in teams? You can't really put a number to it on the surface, but in my opinion, because I've done a ton of this, everything can be quantified, even happiness. If you put codes around happiness, you can quantify it, but you have to declare what happiness is in a given context. And there's no behavior so small or so silly that shouldn't be measured. If it has any impact on the workforce and how work is being done and how people behave, it should be measured. I mean, cost prohibitive stuff shouldn't be, but I'll give you a couple of examples. You won't believe this, but I mean, we get paid for this, okay? We once measured how often people shake their hands. I don't mean shake hands like, hello, I'll shake your hand. I mean, actually flap your hands in the air to get, to cool them down. And you have to wonder, why would employees do that and why do we care? We care if on average they're doing it 6 to 8 minutes. Times 5,000 employees, that's a lot of minutes. And you get to the root cause of why they're flapping their hands in the air. It's because they're touching warm parts out of a machine. And when you touch, 20 parts an hour, your hands start to get really warm and they feel irritated, so you cool them down. I won't talk about what we do to solve that. That's later. But I think probably the most interesting study that I've ever got paid to do, and you won't believe this, you can laugh, permission to laugh. The official title the client wanted was scientific title. It was the severity and frequency of occasional nose picking in a clean room environment. Oh yeah, nose picking. Now, I don't mean like actually a full-on finger insertion into your nose, although that's part of it. It could any time where you just touch the surface of your face, we consider it a nose pick. And I'll tell you the importance of doing this study. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars in wasted productivity, but it was a clean room. A clean room that was like probably 1,000 times cleaner than an operating room in a hospital. And they were making little circuit boards that are half the size of your keyboard, okay? And these circuit boards were so critical to airplanes. If you ever fly on an airplane, the big airplanes, each airplane has 3 of these boards. And only one's supposed to be there, but they have 2 for safety. If one fails, the second one kicks in. The second fails, the third one kicks in. If the third one fails, we have big problems. So you can imagine that room has to be so clean that nothing, no dust, no residue, nothing can get in. But because it was dry, people would then touch their surface of their face. And there's residue, there's oils. And then I won't explain the whole story to you, but if you touch anything in that room, the whole room has to be shut down for upwards of an hour. You have to go out and scrub and de-scrub. In fact, to enter the room, you have to enter a chamber where both doors get sucked closed. All the air gets vacuumed out. There's no air in it for about 10 seconds. And the employees are actually trained to breathe or not breathe during 10 seconds. So every speck of dust is out. And then people come in and they do their job. But it was just human nature that they would touch a portion of their face and get residue on. But if you do touch anything, everybody has to leave. The whole room has to be scrubbed. And that would cost you a lot of money. Now, you wouldn't want an employee to touch a part and say, oops, okay, let it go. No. It goes on an aircraft. They wouldn't do that. So that was the purpose of this little study, okay? Now, when you measure something about your workforce, when you measure a behavior, you then have to assess it. Now, assessment is something you are all good at. You've been good at since you were children. In fact, babies know how to assess. It's a innate, natural thing. For example, diaper, wet. Wet, rash. Rash, itch. Itch, cry. Laugh. Cry, laugh. Cry. Okay, cry. Cry, get attention. Attention, do it again, get more attention. It's an assessment. Baby assesses, should I or what should I do? And there's some sort of benchmark. I mean, tolerance for pain would be the benchmark. It's a rash. It itches, baby cries. I don't know if that makes sense, but anyways. Imagine this. We look at our employees. We measure something about our employees. For example, absenteeism or productivity. And we right away have to assess it. Is it good or bad? Well, when you label good or bad, or what I call dysfunctional bad or functional good, or how dysfunctional or how functional, to what degree, we have to assess it against a point. That point is called a benchmark or a standard. It's your neutral point. It's that one acceptable point. You're either better than it, you're at it, or you're below it. And we do that all the time as humans. Think about it. You judge what other people do, and right away you say, well, that's horrible. Right? Like, take a look at the elections going on in any country, let's say the US, and you wonder, well, you say one person, one politician's not that good. How dare they do that? But there's plenty of voters who say, well, that's okay. Nothing wrong with it. And you have to appreciate that, because differences in how we view the neutral level, the benchmark acceptable level, stems from a lot of different things. From your value system, your beliefs, your ethics. And we'll talk about that later as well. But when an organization sets a standard, it could be too low, so you'll beat it every time. It could be set too high, that you'll never become better than it. But quite often, we get our standards from agencies. Canadian Standards Association. We get our standards from governments. As an example, minimum wage. We don't make it up. Government does. We get, speeding limit. We get the maximum hours that an employee can work in a week. At what point do you go on overtime pay? Those are all standards given to us. But when you get into standards like time-weighted average exposure levels to particulate benzene in a clean room environment, that means how long can you be in a small space with dangerous chemicals around? Well, government sets that standard. You can't go above or below it. Doctors, medical people set standards. Your blood sugar level, your body weight index, your blood pressure. We don't make this stuff up. But quite often, you as an HR department have to set your own standards. For example, what is your tolerance for absenteeism? There's no law that says it. Well, we look at our history to set our standards, which has to be achievable, doable, right? Then we look at history. Where were we in the past? Not too far back, but we have to look at time. But also our competition, our industry, and associations publish this data. They tell you in your industry, in your area, this is the number that's normal. And then you make a judgment call, right? So what works for you? And here, I'll give you an example. Let's say my absenteeism rate now is 12%. Now, if you don't know what absenteeism rate is, the simplest way to look at it is you count all the days people didn't work and divide by the number of days they should have worked. So if you missed 10 days out of 100 days you should have worked, that's 10% absenteeism, right? But you do it for everybody. And in fact, in pivots, we're going to do that same calculation for a lot of people. Now, 12% absenteeism in the last year. I'll ask you, is it good, bad? Is it dysfunctional, neutral? Is it okay? Is it functional, very functional? Well, you probably say by definition, 0 absenteeism is good. So 12 is horrible. Well, yeah, I guess it is. You can't get 0. I told you a number of 3 is about right, 3%. 0 is not possible. People do get sick. They do miss days. But 12% could be bad, horrific, or it could be good. There are industries right now where they have a part-time, transient workforce, where upwards of 20-25% absenteeism is okay. 12% would be awesome. But you go to a firm like my law firm where we tolerated 1.5% because we had a lot of wellness programs, quality of work-life balance programs, then our tolerance is low. At Seneca, you wouldn't want me to miss 12% of my classes, would you? No. 1 out of 12 maybe, but certainly not 12%. Does that make sense? So I want you to think about, and some of you can specialize in this area that sets standards and benchmarks for other organizations, because HR is starving for good benchmarks. In the absence of good benchmarks, managers just make them up. And quite often they're biased and they set them kind of low. Now, there's some organizations who don't mind. They operate at a low level anyways. Like if you're a company making cheap goods for dollar stores, quality, your tolerance might be very low because it doesn't matter how quality the product is. It's going to a dollar store. Customers don't mind if it's broken for $1. But if you're making medicines, I would assume that your tolerance will be quite high. But within the same industry, take Apple, for example. Apple set its standards across the board, including HR, very high. My law firm set its standards very high. We had competitor law firms who set their standards very low, or relatively low. They didn't hire based on strict criteria. They tolerated mistakes. Whereas our law firm was very strict and we hired the best. And that attracted more people because of it. We had high standards. A company like Berkshire Hathaway, owned by Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway investment company, their standards are so high that even to get in, they're going to look for the best of the best of the best. But they'll guarantee you retire a millionaire. So you're going to spend years and years thinking about what standards are and question every standard. When your boss says you're above this or you're below it, question above or below what, based on what, and how old is it? Now, when you measure something about your workforce, a behavior, and you quickly assess it to be neutral, you decide to, okay, say, maintain the course, let it go, leave it alone. You might say, no, I want to make it better, more functional, so you raise the bar. You use things like training, compensation, incentives, even disciplinary action. You can technically fire people that are low. Fire all the red people down here, right? And hire more people that are above, and then raise the bar every year. You can look at a behavior if you assess it as dysfunctional and say, nope, I need to fix it and make it all neutral. And when everything is neutral, raise the bar, make it functional, and then raise the bar again. That's called fine-tuning and optimization in HR. But you can only see this if you have data in the first place, right? Now, when you do find something that you want to change, let's say it's dysfunctional, you have to fix it, that process is called conditioning. So when you measure something about your workforce, the behavior, you want to change it, we condition it. Now, listen, we're borrowing certain words from science. All this is based out of science anyways. I'm just taking as many science words out, getting them down to business level for you. But conditioning in that sense simply means changing it. We use policies and programs in HR to change the behavior. And then in the next session, we're actually going to do a real-life absenteeism case with the chart, and you're going to help figure out what we can do to condition the behavior. For example, if your absenteeism was 12% and you decided, wait, it should be lower, and you want to lower it to 8%, that's a good target. Then what would you do to your employees to condition it? What would you do? Think about it, okay? I mean, you might say things like give them incentives, wellness programs, exercise programs, better meals, working conditions. You might say training, maybe not, but it could be a lot of different things. In the case of that smelly company up north of Toronto, just put in industrial aromatherapy to neutralize the odor, make it smell better. You'd be surprised that absenteeism will go down just because of it. Okay, we'll talk about that later. Now, I do want to talk about a word called context, because everything we just talked about is not fixed. I mean, you can't read a case and say, hey, this is cool, it's going to apply to everywhere I go. No, you learn from it. Maybe it's old, maybe it's not new, I don't know. But you have to understand this thing called context. Now, many of you, well, you all know what context is. Context is like, when should I do where should I do, what should I do? Telling a joke with your family is different than telling a joke to your friends, right? Different place, different people. But context, in fact, if you don't know, has 3 different elements to it. Context is based on your understanding and appreciation of people, demographics, the place, geographics, and the time, histographics. right? Now you're going to spend years and years getting good at these three things. Some of you already are. Like if I were to ask you, who here is a people person? Who knows people? Many of you will put up your hand and say, I know people. I can judge people. I can look at those people and tell them who they are, what they're thinking. I would ask you, who here does people watching? You ever done people watching? It's where you go to a mall or my favorite thing is to sit outside al fresco on a patio downtown and just watch people go by. Not in a nosy sort of intrusive sort of way, but then wonder what their story is. I observe, I watch behavior patterns, and I especially watch how people deal with younger people, anybody under the age of 12, because that shows you a lot. You can learn so much by watching younger people. Not in a sort of weird sort of way, but if you have access to nieces, nephews, watch. See what they do, how they do it. Don't let them know you're watching. But then if they're doing something bad, apply some sort of condition like a treatment. Yell at them, for example, or give them candy. And then see how their behavior changes. Right? You can learn so much. In fact, we borrowed a lot from that science, Pavlov and Skinner, like the operant conditioning. Cats and dogs, right? Humans are also living things. They react the same way. There's a root cause of why they do something. And if you apply the right stimulus, the right treatment to change that behavior, they will in fact change that behavior. Again, we'll get to more of that in the next session. But your understanding of people, different people, allows you to determine then what is it that causes people to do what they're doing. You can't just categorize every employee as the same and say, how dare you be absent. Within demographics, you have to consider this whole context of culture. Different cultures think differently. You have to appreciate that to some extent. And also generations. I mean, you know what generations are, and I'm a big fan of studying generations. Please take some time to study generations. I think you do in your OB course. Like there's, baby boomers, there's X, Y, Z. That's okay, that doesn't matter. And I don't just mean age-wise generations. I mean generations and how they think. And you appreciate that managers who are from one generation set policy that is managing employees from another generation. And they wonder why and they call them punks and their work ethic is low. Maybe not. Let's relabel that. Maybe their work ethic is not bad. Maybe it's bad compared to what you did. But maybe we need to change how we manage people based on who the people are. The minimum considered, company still has to run. But why can't we change our work day? Why can't we change our dress code? Why can't we use different disciplinary actions? Why can't we change the compensation we offer to our employees to meet the needs of that generation? So please start studying generations, okay? And the other thing, the new one, and it irritates me that more people don't talk about this, is mental health. And that's under people, it's under demographics. Mental health. I mean, look, it's not new. It's been around for thousands of years. It's just we're labeling it now new. People are paying somewhat attention. Not really. Not really. The whole system here is not that good to help deal with it. Remember, I'm a consultant. I see this. But when you appreciate what it is, then that helps you explain why people behave the way they do. And you can't label it as that's bad or that's good. I mean, again, bottom line, company still has to run. Don't get me wrong, okay? But when you deal with things like anxiety and the other parts of the spectrum, you could have OCD, this or whatever. I won't get into that detail. Then you develop layers of emotional intelligence because you are now putting yourself in the shoes of people who are behaving a certain way. And there could be reasonable accommodations around it. In fact, you might be able to harness the creative power within it. But if all you're doing is labeling and saying, well, these people are no good, they're lazy, they're not working hard, then of course you're going to lose out on a large segment of the workforce population. So consider that, demographics, people. Your understanding of people helps you decide on how you treat those people. How do you deal with them? Now, place is important as well. I don't know if you've traveled. It's okay if you haven't. But if you watch travel shows on TV, even those cooking shows that go around the world, you learn about different cultures. You learn about different people, even within Canada. I'll give you an example. We had a client So we flew out to Halifax, which is on the east coast of Canada, Atlantic Ocean, and we did a program. It was a very expensive program. It worked. It was very successful. Now, head office near Toronto, just outside of Toronto, they said, hey, this is successful. And they knew all across Canada, they had 13 factories in Canada. They said all the work is all the same. We make the same product and people must be the same. We're all Canadians. They immediately said it was close to $1 million. They said, can you go right away to the West Coast, which is Vancouver, just outside of Vancouver, Westminster? Can you do the same program? They got so excited. The reports are good. And we're trying to tell them no. First of all, you can't do the same thing, so you can't just throw money at it, because people on the West Coast, Pacific Ocean, are not the same all around as people on the East Coast. By the way, both beautiful, awesome places you should go visit. Canada's an awesome place to visit throughout. But in any case, West Coast versus East Coast. We have a company, I should say, in Toronto, head office in Toronto, 32 divisions just in Ontario, and then they had a few factories in the United States and in other countries. But there was a big meeting that happened, and thank God HR was invited to this. And the meeting was about a new customer that needed super high levels of production, parts, very quickly. They made parts. And so the decision was which plant to send this production to, which is the most efficient plant. And one of their newest plants was in a place in the United States, in a state called Tennessee. You can Google that, okay? Tennessee. Don't ask me to spell it. And it was in a town called Chattanooga. Oh yeah, Chattanooga. Or like I'd say Chattanooga. And there's a famous song about a train from Chattanooga. Google it. In any case, Tennessee is what we call the Deep South. It's like way in the southern United States. And it's a mountainous region, so they would call mountain folk. Yeah, I'm allowed to say that. So what happened was a director of production in Toronto was arguing very, very stereotypically that there's no way, and he used the words those people, I mean, you can't say that, right? Are going to be able to produce that quickly, that efficiently, because he thinks that they're just lazy, they're mountain folk, they don't work fast enough, and they can't grasp a new concept, like a new way of producing. A lot of training was involved. HR steps in and tells the guy bluntly, have you ever been there? The guy goes, no, but this is what I know. HR says, go visit. That is the most productive factory you can have. They might not know how to do the job today, but they're rapid learners. You give the training, they will learn so quickly, and their work ethic is solid. You ask them to work 9 hours a day, they will, no complaints. You ask to work 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, they will work 6 days. Sunday will never happen, right? It's a religious day. But they will. The work ethic is strong, the attitude towards work is strong, and the complaints are next to zero. People there do not complain, and they learn quickly. Now, HR knew that because they studied the people in Tennessee. Whereas this plant manager, director of production, was just lump summing everybody into a general category. So the place itself has changes in how you deal with employees. You know, people ask me, I have international students, they say, how is HR different from what we're learning here to another country? They want to go back to another country to practice. And I go, look, humans are humans. It's a universal thing. There's certain things that are common about every human. Then there's certain things that are common to a Canadian context. I mean, we're the most polite people on earth. You get the idea, right? We drink a lot of coffee. Yeah, I get it. So you can apply that to Canadians, but Indians, let's say, or Chinese or British, are maybe different in their own right. Their attitude towards money, for example, is different. Their attitude towards working hours or the working conditions is different. Right? And then, of course, we can say Western world, Eastern world, I don't know how you categorize, but place determines how you deal with people. Now, the last one is time. Right? So if you're using things that you learned in the past, you have to realize the past can repeat itself. You learn from it, you never forget it, but you can't apply it all the time. Right? And I'll tell you how far back in history you can go and still be safe. About 6 to 8 years. That's about it. Too many things change, okay? Half a generation changes in 8 years. Now, I want all of you to ask yourself right now, 10 years ago, how old were you? And most of you would be in that kind of anywhere from 12 years to 15 years, most of you, okay? 12 to 15 years old. I mean, you were an early teenager. You were a child, really. And ask yourself, what was that one really stupid thing I did 10 years ago? And you're going to say, oh my God, I did that? And you forgive yourself. You're forgiven. Relax. Don't feel bad about it. Now, imagine me. I found out about this as an employer. And I go, oh my God, they did that 10 years ago? There's no way I'm going to hire you. Well, what the heck? No, of course I will, because too many things have changed. It's called a maturational effect. Something has matured. And I don't mean emotionally either. I mean just matured, changed. When you look at a study that was done 20 years ago, maybe out of a textbook or a case study or something your company did, and you don't realize that too many things have changed over 20, 30 years, well, we got issues then. You're not capable of looking at time or histographics as an element of context. You know, the most famous case study, the first one ever written, was done near World War II in the 1940s. That would be 60, 70 years ago. And it was by Kinsey and Company. And it was called the Hawthorne Electric Case Study. Read it. It's a really good case. It's old. And a lot of the things they discovered are still true today. They're the ones who coined the term hygiene factors. And they're the ones who said simply by cleaning up the factory, making it less smelly, less dirty, is what motivated people to work differently. It wasn't the money. It wasn't threats or discipline. It was the working conditions. Of course that holds true, but the way they looked at it has changed over the years, partly because of generations and so on. So guys, always, for the rest of your HR professional practice, keep context in mind, because when you have context in mind, the decision you make reflects the people at this time, at this place. Make sense? And remember, I told you, I'll just remind you, we as HR professionals are like doctors. You are getting framework right now within which to practice HR. Doctors in medical school get framework. They're not doctors when they graduate, they get framework. Then they start practicing medicine. You will start practicing human resources so that when you're more senior, you'll be able to diagnose a problem with the workforce, come up with the best condition to treat, and you'll see the changes right away, just like a doctor. Now, one last thing. I want you to keep this in mind at all times. Now, we're borrowing this from the science world. It's called a scientific method. I'm going to call it the approach. Now, listen, drop the word scientific. Just call it the professional approach, okay? 5 things that you're continually going to practice in your mind. Think, breathe, live it. Let's start with curiosity and awareness. Always you're going to be curious and aware. You're going to notice things all around you. So the first thing is called driving motivation. Like any good scientist, in your case you're an HR scientist, if you don't have the drive, the motivation to notice things, to know your employees, to have your finger on the pulse of what your employees are up to and make that difference, that change. And I don't mean in a frou-frou sort of, hey, we're all kumbaya. Wait, I can't say that. You know what I mean? Like in that way that maybe could turn people off. Like soft. Because you get managers who'll use exact those words. Those are not necessarily my words. They'll call you soft, and that's a reputation HR has. That's not what I mean. I mean to have a tough driving motivation. I want to make a change. I want to make the company healthier and take my employees along with me. So when you have that, you're going to realize, hey, I need to continually observe my workforce, measure, find out what they're up to, have my finger on the pulse of my workforce at all times. And that's called systematic observation. You're going to systematically do it. Not just do it. Do it in an official, formal way. Continually collecting data, surveying, talking to people, observing people, gathering data, keeping data. That's when you start noticing things, right? Then you can assess. Now, you're then constantly going to think in theoretical terms as well. Now, you're all good at theoretical thinking. Theoretical just means doesn't have to be real or not. It's just theoretically what's possible. Theoretically, I'm dreaming of inventing a flying machine. Wait, those are called airplanes. I mean, where humans can fly without an airplane. Theoretically, it's possible. I don't know if it's probabilistic or realistic, but hey, maybe. But in HR, here's what you're going to do. And by the way, now your job is no longer 9 to 5. Your job is 24 hours a day. Everything you see, every person you meet, everything you see on the television, you're continuing, not in a preoccupied sort of way, but just subtly, you're going to ask yourself, how could this possibly impact my employees? Because those people I interact with on a daily basis everywhere, they are like my employees. And you're continually going to think in theoretical terms, what can I do to change that? What could possibly work? And you come up with all sorts of amazing ideas that are just theoretical, they're not proven. And they're part of your repertoire, your catalog of things that you can do. But then here's the key. This is where the big bucks are, okay? If you're then able to think in probabilistic terms, theoretically this could work to change my employees' behavior, right? You just came up with an idea because you saw something on TV. But probabilistically, what will work with my people at this place, at this time, context. Now, when you become good at thinking in probabilistic terms, you will pick things that are so accurate that that's where the big dollars are. That's what VPs, they make tons of money. Your doctor, same thing. Early on, they have to read books. You know, there's lots of theoretically, this drug could work for what you're experiencing. But the more seasoned and more practiced a doctor is, they can just look at you and within 10 seconds say, yep, this is going to work for you, I know. Because they're able to, in their mind, put all sorts of things together about context, about you. And you become good at it. Don't worry if you can't do it today. And the last thing is you're going to systematically apply. Now, I'm going to use the word experimentation here, but going forward, don't use the word experimentation in HR ever, okay? It's application. You're not just going to do what you think will work. You're going to do it properly, systematically. Take notes. Do it in a timed manner. You're going to observe. For example, if you think training will fix a behavior, just doing training is not good enough. Doing it, then measuring it, seeing the validity of it, the effectiveness of it, the cost effectiveness of it, that is systematic. In fact, using control groups to test out your training first, that's systematic. And thank God we have tools like HRIS software, Excel, pivots, Tableau. All of this stuff will help you visualize your results so that it's not an overburdening task to do any of these. And you, my friends, now are on your way to the start of your professional HR practice. We'll see you in the next session.